Now, when you're working with complex images like this, it's hard to make a fine and clean selection. You could, of course, use the tools that we have seen earlier to make a selection, something like this, but of course, this won't work. Let me use a magic wand to see if that works somewhat better, but it's hard to get the entire selection right. And specifically with these small external hairs, and especially with these small hairs or whiskers that are visible in this particular image. So to fix that, there is something that Photoshop has provided us with, which is called the select and mask option. Now, when you click on any of these selection tools, you'd always see the select and mask option. If you have selected or created a selection already, you can click on this, or you can do this selection directly inside the image. So let's try and look at what and how that works. So with select and mask, there is a new window that opens up. On this window, you can see that there are few tools which are limited to selection tools on the left side. There are few properties on the right side, and the main canvas looks somewhat different than the canvas outside. Now let's see what tools are available and how do you use all of these. On the left side, these are selection tools. If I just go through all of them, they are the quick selection tool. There is a refine edge brush tool. There is something for a simple brush tool. There is an object selection tool. This is something that has come in the newer version of Photoshop. The well-known lasso at the polygon and lasso tool, and a hand and zoom in. On the right side, under the properties, the first tab is about the view mode. Now in the view mode, there are multiple options. Onion skin, that is basically the transparency, that is with the transparency grid in the background and the selection in the foreground. Marching ants, very similar to how the selection looks like in the main canvas. An overlay mode in which everything out of the selection looks like a red color. On black, which is everything is which is not selected comes in black. Similarly, there is on white. There's something called black and white, which means the entire selection comes in white color and the out of selection areas on black. And then on layers, that is an entire transparency grid with all the layers which are visible over here. Let's stick to one of this and see what the next action is. So let's see how these view modes work. So once I've selected the onion skin option, let's see how the transparency changes. When the transparency is 0, the entire selection is not visible. But when I move it to 100, everything that has been selected is visible, and everything that's not been selected is not visible or is entirely transparent. Similarly, in marching ants or in overlay mode, you'd be able to see the opacity that way, and you can also see the color and indicates what mask areas or the selected areas. Masking is basically the area which is not visible or not selected. So let's stick with this option for now and move on to the next settings. There are a few options over here, which is show edge, show original, and high quality preview. We would take in the high quality preview for this time. We can actually slow this down to make it slightly better as well, and we'll see how that works. Now, before I move on to the refine mode, which is the next stage after the selection has been done, let's understand and let's make a cleaner selection over here with at least the parts which are definitely inside the selection. To do that, I will use a quick selection tool. I can change the size of this and select an area with this. Now when I do that, there is slight delay in terms of the execution. I'm not sure if you can see that, but this is because of the high quality preview. I can turn that off and the delay is far lesser. Now with this, I can see the masking is slightly better. I am able to select these areas very easily. And with the quick selection tool, I'm able to select all of these areas seamlessly.
Wow.
So this is one way of going about it. I can do the similar structure with the refine edge brush tool as well. This also refines it after I have selected or after I have given a stroke over the area that I would want to select. I can use a brush tool, which is a direct implication of selection. So if I basically paint over a area, it selects it by default. So I could, for instance, do that over here and it will select that area. Whereas if I was using the quick selection tool, it selects the rest of the area as well, which is very similar to the selection that we are looking at. Let's undo. Yeah. Now with this small segments of area, I can zoom in and create a simple lasso around it. Which saves a lot of time for me to cover these small segments, which I know are definitely part inside the selection that I would want to make. There are a few areas that I would not want to take in, and I can subtract this area, just like how we do it in a normal canvas. Now I know that there is some fur that I would want to take in. Let's create a area of selection over here. Wow, and because I had chosen the wrong option over here, that's why it brought up that. Let me undo and select the area that I would want as an add to selection. With this, I've gotten this. I actually never realized till now that this cat does not have the second leg in the front. That's probably because of the camera angle that it has been shot at. But with this, I think I have selected quite some area that I would want in selection. Let me reduce opacity or transparency of the image and see if I'm missing something. Yeah, with this we can see that the leg is not visible. And we have taken to quite some extent. Alright, I think this is the tail that we would want to have. Let me increase opacity to some extent. Add that area. Let's reduce opacity to somewhat and make a quick selection. I wouldn't want this green area, so let me paint over that. Yeah, and with this, we have a better refined version of our selection. This has to be the part of the image. Right, I think this should do it quite some extent. Now, with this, let's move on to the next set of settings that we were looking at. Let me fit screen. When I go under refine mode, there are a few options that helps me refine this edge selection that has been done through different mechanisms. It could either be color aware or it could be object aware. Now, when it says color aware, that basically means the difference in color. And when it says object aware, that basically means Photoshop will try to best detect a different object altogether. Let's stick to Carrara for now. The next option is about edge detection. Now with edge detection, I can choose the edge that is there and increase the radius of it. Now with an increased radius, that basically means the small nooks and crannies of each of these edges, it will try to bring in a smaller or a better edge detection. So with these hair whiskers that you can see on the cat, with a higher radius, I've been able to extract these very cleanly. You can see that with the high opacity and with a better edge detection, I will be able to, with a higher radius, I will be able to select these whiskers quite cleanly. So that's that. There's something for global refinements that basically means the entire selection that has been made can be made either smoother. That means the nooks and crannies will get reduced and will have a higher radius. So we can see that when I bump it up to quite a high extent, these selections over here, they've become quite smoother with this. Moving on to feather. With feather, it smoothens out the selection to quite a large extent. To see this in action, let me bump this up to a very high number and you'll be able to see how the selection decreases or increases in gradient. With a number as high as that, you will see a finer or a very smoother selection between the areas which is selected and not selected. Currently, we see a very harsh red line over here, which is actually quite smoother than what we were looking at earlier. That's because of the smooth, and because of feather, which is now come into action, you can see that the selection is much more softer. Let's take it back to 2.5 pixels. That will be something that would be okay with us. And the next thing is contrast. Contrast basically increases or decreases the contrast of the selection. If I bump it high, the difference is going to be way higher. Yeah, and you can see how the selection is now way contrasting than what it was earlier. So with the smooth, it has reduced the nicks and curves over here, but with contrast, it has made it slightly stronger with a sort of difference. Let me take it back to 0. The next option is to shift edge. Now with shift edge, there is something that we can go in both the directions. It could be outside or it could be inside. If I take it outside, it will increase the radius that it has or the area that it has selected and shift it towards outside. So with the positive number on the shift edge percentage, you'll see the edges have increased, and if I do that on the negative side, you'll see the pixels would be covering more of the area that we have actually selected. And you can see how the selection has been covering is now covering the area that we had actually selected. Let's take it down to 0. And then the next set of options are to clear selection or to invert this entirely. Currently, we have selected the cat. If in case we wanted to select everything but the cat, we can actually do that by clicking on invert. Let's do that because of how we're going to be using this in the next step. So if I click on invert, you'll see that instead of the marching that's over here, the area will be selected on the green or the grass. And finally, in the output settings, you can choose to do exactly what you want to by a certain amount over here. But instead of this, we'll take it back into our main canvas and go there. So the output can be in multiple ways. The output could be a selection, a layer mask, a new layer with layer mask, a new document, or a new document with layer mask. We can do all of these. And at the end of it, if none of these things actually worked, you can go ahead and reset it. But I think this is fairly what we wanted, and we'll continue with that. Now with this, let me create a new layer mask for this layer. Click on OK. And you can see that the cat is now not visible while the other parts are. Let's see how to use this in a different way. You create a duplicate of this layer. Remove the mask from it. And on this layer, let's reduce the opacity, or let's reduce the color of the grass. You can do that by clicking on hue saturation and changing the green
Yes.
to somewhat of a yellow or a brown color. And with this, what I can do is, now that I have a duplicate of the layer, I can select this layer, add a hue saturation adjustment layer, and reduce the saturation of the layer. Now currently it's reducing for the entire layer, but if I link it just to the layer below it, you'd see my cat is now in color while everything else has been darkened out. And that's how you use refine, edge or select and mask tool to make your selection slightly better.